Arizona is home to 22 tribal nations and more than 340,000 Native Americans. Arizona State University builds on more than 6 decades of working and partnering with tribal nations and communities. Many of our Native faculty incorporate Indigenous knowledge systems in seeking solutions through a process of community engagement that respects and honors traditional ways of thinking. Together, we are creating community solutions leading to a more equitable future.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. COVID-19 cases are rising in children from the Sandy Bay Ojibwe First Nations in Canada. According to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the First Nation is facing 24 active cases on the reserve and at least 12 cases off the reserve. Virginia Luanchek is Sandy Bay's pandemic response coordinator. She says at least half of the cases are from children who got the virus from attending schools out of town. All of the schools in Sandy Bay are remote learning. Cases in the reserve started spiking around June 4th, and currently they have 36 households in isolation. She adds that most of the children who tested positive are not getting sick or showing any symptoms, but she's still strongly advising the community to stay home. The Indian Collective is preparing to launch its new Land Back U. Land Back University is a free online learning platform focused on teaching the importance of reclaiming land. Crystal Two Bulls is the Land Back campaign director. Two Bulls says they are announcing the launch with the intent to reclaim Indigenous stories, voices, and methods of transferring knowledge. The collective also says the space is for Indigenous peoples to communicate solutions that have worked and will work to protect the ecosystem. Registration is now open. Deb Haaland is urging President Joe Biden to protect 3 national monuments diminished by President Donald Trump. According to the Washington Post, they include Utah's Bears Ears, Grand Staircase Escalante, and a huge marine reserve off New England. According to anonymous sources the Washington Post spoke to, the reserve would be about 5 million acres of federal land and water. Trump cut Bears Ears by nearly 85% and Grand Staircase Escalante almost in half. He also allowed commercial fishing on the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument, which removed most of the monument's protections. The famed turquoise waters of Havasu Falls will remain closed to tourists for now. The falls are on the Havasupai Reservation in northern Arizona. The tribe voted to extend the closure in the best interests of the community. While the tribe has reported no new cases of the coronavirus, officials say they are acting with caution because the virus could spread. The tribe has been working on vaccinating its members and is asking the 450 people who live on the reservation to stay home except when getting essential items. Tourists who book stays at the tribe's lodge or campgrounds during the suspension will be rescheduled for dates in 2022. The tribe also said no further permits will be issued for the time being. Native art is coming to a miniature golf course in Minneapolis. The Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota is working with the Native Youth Arts Collective on 2 holes for its mini golf course. The Arts Collective is made up of youth from the Little Earth of United Tribes housing projects. The hole, designed titled Turtle Pond, is based on the animal's stature in Anishinaabe culture. On the turtle's shell, there's a floral emblem that recreates the idea of vegetation growing on its back. Ayana Klein, who is Turtle Mountain Chippewa, talks about the inspiration behind the golf hole she designed.
I was inspired by the creation story. Turtles are very sacred to Anishinaabe culture. So I chose that as my revolving kind of like piece. And I thought about when we were going through the meetings and they were giving us inspiration how we should do our mini golf project. I thought of, I was honestly lost in what I was going to do. Then I thought about golfing, I thought about land, and I thought about how land means to us.
The other design is titled Dreamcatcher and was created by Red Lake Ojibwe citizen Brenna White. White says the concept for her design came from listening to Little Earth's community and community elders. The miniature golf course is open Thursday through Sunday. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Coming up, a Lakota rancher who's made the healing power of horses his life's work.
Some legal decisions are impacting tribes, and we'll meet with a congresswoman with a big voice.
This is Indian Country Today.
The Hunkpapa leader, Sitting Bull, was a star in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in 1885. The horse he rode was trained to dance at the sound of gunshot. In 1890, Sitting Bull was killed outside of his cabin by Indian agents. Legend has it that his horse danced and fell to the ground when Sitting Bull was assassinated. The horse was a gift from Buffalo Bill Cody, but the legacy of Sitting Bull's horses lives on today. John Eagle Sr. has made it his life's work to bring healing through horses. Becoming one with the spirit of the horse is the business John and his family started for breeding and equine therapy. Welcome, John. Tell us the story of Sitting Bull's horses.
When you think about Lakota people, we've been studying our trauma for decades now, trying to understand the social conditions that we live in. And we talk about the Indian Wars, we can talk about the forced assimilation, about the boarding schools and failed US Indian federal policy. But what we seem to have forgotten was how traumatic the loss of the horse was. So when you think about what we're about ready to celebrate on June 25th, and our ancestors' great victory at the Battle of the Greasy Grass when they defeated then Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry. A response to that by the United States government was General Sheridan at the time gave an order to the army to disarm and dismount the Lakota. And the unfortunate part of that is they went after the peaceful Lakota, the ones that were already settled onto the reservations, and disarmed and dismounted them. It resulted in a federal claim that was paid out until right around World War II, and they were referred to as the Sioux Pony claims. But that didn't affect the hostiles right away. And what I mean by the hostiles is my family had joined up with Sitting Bull and were declared hostile. When you think about that, though, what that really means is that they cherished who they were, they cherished their way of life, and they cherished each other so much so that they wouldn't allow a foreign people to dictate where they can go and who they can be. So the hostiles traveled into Canada, and there was an event in July 1890 of that year where they came out of Canada. And this is where the story of that horse really begins. When they came into the United States and re-entered, their horses were confiscated. Now, the trauma that caused, I think, was so deep that over time we quit talking about that. So when you think about our ancestors and the relationship they had with their horses, they referred to them as Chunkshi, not Chinkshi, my son and my daughter. So to lose that was an incredible, deep spiritual wound. There was a man, a French aristocrat, who actually admired the story of Sitting Bull. He admired the story of the Hunkpapa. So when those horses were confiscated, he purchased 250 head of those horses with the intentions of breeding them up, breeding them to thoroughbreds so that he could have a taller horse, but that a horse that would still have the stamina and the intelligence of that Indian pony. Ranchers within the area were studying that. They were studying the herd stallions. They were keeping track of the herd, the bands of mares. They were keeping track of the foals, so that in the 70s, when Castle McLaughlin, a PhD level anthropologist, was hired by the national park to study their practices, not only in herd management, but the removal of the horses, stumbled upon that story through interviews, that particular horse that was in that park was descendants of those confiscated from Sitting Bull and the Hunkpapa.
How do these horses help through equine therapy?
Here in the Dakotas, when the thunderstorms come, they can come in a real soft, gentle way, and you hear this real beautiful rumbling off in the distance. And then if you watch, you can see their scouts. The lightning strike Ochimaka where she needs to be healed, and you'll see those showers fall in those spots. But they can also come in a really terrifying way. And that loud first clap can startle you and scare you and shake your walls and knock things off your walls. So they're both good and bad, have the ability to create life, the ability to destroy life. And that horse is the same way. that horses is exactly the same way. They have both good in them and bad in them, ability to create life, ability to destroy life. So there's been times in my life that I've been asked to help people with problem horses. But when I get into the situation and I start working with those horses, I find out that they really don't have a problem horse. It's the people. So if you have a horse that people are saying is bad, strong possibility it's not that horse. It's those people and what they're interacting with. This horse is different. This horse was bred for war, but it was bred in a way that had a relationship with our people. So when you think about our ancestors in the past, they didn't have corral systems. They didn't have these fancy horse trailers we have, but yet they traveled with this horse. This horse stayed with them as they traveled. So they actually come up to you. And we've been implementing them in equine therapy and therapeutic horsemanship, and have found the results and the outcomes to be profound. That oftentimes in that first interaction, those people go right to their core issues. And it's the horse. That's the great thing about this. It's a horse. It's a horse. And you can't train him to do that. The horse just knows what to do, and it knows who needs help.
That was John Eagle Sr. talking about equine therapy on the Standing Rock Nation. When we come back, a unanimous Supreme Court decision. Earlier this month, the Supreme Court held that a tribal police officer can detain temporarily and search non-Indian persons on highways running through tribal lands for potential law violations. Attorney Trent Shores joins us to break this down. A member of the Choctaw Nation, he's with Gable Gutwells in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He served 18 years in the Department of Justice and chaired the Native American Issues Subcommittee to the Attorney General's Advisory Council. He recently left the Northern District of Oklahoma as its U.S. Attorney. Welcome, Trent. This seems like a huge win for sovereignty. What was the Supreme Court asked to decide?
This really is a huge case when it comes to reaffirming the sovereignty of Native American tribes and specifically of the authority of tribal police officers, and recognizing that they have power to temporarily detain non-Indians to search or investigate whether or not that non-Indian on the reservation is engaged in a violation of state law or federal law. I think that it's significant for a number of reasons, but really this is a case that not only reaffirms tribal sovereignty, but also recognizes some of the practical realities that police officers on reservations face. They don't know when they approach a vehicle or an individual whether or not that person may be Indian or non-Indian. So the court really took into account, it seemed, practical considerations as well.
Put this into context with last year's McGirt decision.
It's an interesting case in the regard of how it might intersect with, say, the McGirt decision that came out last summer, right? The big blockbuster Indian country decision that impacted Oklahoma, in recognizing that the Muskogee Reservation was never disestablished at the time of statehood. That created a situation here in Oklahoma where I'm standing right now on the Muskogee Reservation is also within the city limits of Tulsa, where you have a number of Indians and non-Indians interacting. And so when we saw the Ninth Circuit's decision in the Cooley case, had that been affirmed, it could have created more chaos if tribal officers did not have authority over non-Indians. So certainly the unanimous decision in this case was significant in taking that jurisdiction a step further and recognizing that tribal officers do in fact have that authority to investigate and search non-Indians. It provides seamless jurisdiction over moments or over those instances where tribal officers are approaching individuals that they don't know what their Indian or non-Indian status is. To sort of break it down to what happened in Cooley, this is back in 2016 on the Crow Reservation in Montana, where an officer saw a truck idling on the side of a highway that passed through the reservation. And the officer stopped to investigate what was going on. And as he spoke with Mr. Cooley, the officer determined that there were guns and methamphetamine in that particular vehicle. That ultimately led to a federal gun and drugs prosecution of Mr. Cooley, who, as a non-Indian, made the argument that that tribal officer did not have jurisdiction over him. And the district court of the Ninth Circuit agreed with Mr. Cooley. Fortunately, the Supreme Court overturned that decision and said, no, you've got it all wrong. And they did so in unanimous fashion, which is really significant, I think, moving forward. This is the first time we've seen this iteration of the court with these justices consider an Indian country case and a public safety case. And so I think that the fact that it is unanimous in and of itself is significant.
What does this say about the future of federal and tribal government policy?
When we look at the evolution of United States policy with regard to Indian tribes, what we know is that the less federal government involvement in local affairs, the better. Every president since Richard Nixon has adopted a policy of tribal self-determination. And that has led to an era of tribes thriving, of tribes developing their own sovereign governments, their own court and judicial systems, and responsibly exercising governmental and jurisdictional authority. Seeing tribal sovereignty in action is a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. We have lots of great examples of it from coast to coast. What was significant about the Cooley decision in that context, though, is this Supreme Court took this Montana test where historically they'd said tribes have no jurisdiction over non-Indians except in two unique exceptions. One, where there's a relationship, like where that non-Indian has entered into a business contract with the tribe, or two, where that non-Indian's conduct in some way threatens or has some direct effect on the political integrity or the economic security or health and welfare of the tribe. And in this decision, it's the first time that tribes have ever won on that second prong, and the Supreme Court extended Montana to apply in a criminal context. So when we talk about McGirt, when we talk about changing policy, what this court has indicated is that the Montana test is the test that they are adopting, and they've now applied it even more broadly. And I think we're going to see an era in this court and in federal policy where tribal sovereignty is respected, and we recognize that local government or tribal government is good government with less federal oversight.
She comes from people of the Big Voice, so perhaps it's fitting that Charisses Davids grew up to become one of the first Native women to be elected to Congress. As a child, she loved to talk, and that's what helped her win over the voters. She's chosen to tell her story in a children's book, Charisses Big Voice, a Native kid becomes a congresswoman. And in her words, you deserve to be seen and heard. Welcome, Representative Davids.
We think about what children see, and they're obviously learning all the time. They hear so much more than we think that they do. They pick up lessons and pointers in some ways. And I think that the talking piece is one of those things that I really wanted to make sure to share from my childhood, because especially when a kid looks at somebody who's in Congress now, I imagine they might think, man, she must have had it figured out from the beginning, or she probably never gotten in trouble, or she was probably the valedictorian, and none of that is true. So I hope that when people look at the stories that I shared in Charisses Big Voice, they can see that all of our journeys and paths are different, but they're all really important. I've learned this about our government and elected officials, but also just kind of generally. So I was really surprised to learn that in the children's book space, of all the characters in all the children's books, there's only like 1% of the characters have any kind of Native representation. And in the same way we need to have leaders and decision makers in the government and across the board, we also need to see that as kids. We need to see the diversity and particularly for Native kids, I think it's really important for us to see just to see all the different journeys that we're all on.
One of the great stories you tell is about your mother and her role in the military.
My mom served in the Army for 20 years, from before I was born until after I got out of high school. And it wasn't something maybe that I realized in the moment, but certainly looking back, I learned so much about leadership, about service, about the impact that we can have on this country as individuals and as Native people. I think that it's really important to share that, because it's like, it has made such a huge difference for me, and I wanted other people to get the chance to see that. You know, having a strong woman, a strong HoChunk woman raised me was it has been a huge piece of how I ended up being the person that I am.
I appreciate your story about being of the HoChunk Nation.
I was really intentional about sharing. In the book, there's a story about me coming home from school, basically, and saying, you know, like, "Mommy, what am I?" Because the other students at school would say that to me, "What are you?" And I think for anybody, maybe Native kids who are in spaces where they might be the only Native kid there, and lots of other kids, it's not just Native kids that have this happen, but I really wanted to make sure to share that story, because I thought it was really important to, one, acknowledge that doesn't feel very good. And then, you know, my mom starts talking to me about, oh, well, when people ask you that, they want to know, you can tell them that you're HoChunk. And, you know, there's a little bit in the story of the book about, you know, the forced removal of Indigenous people from their lands, from our lands. And then in the back of the book, I'm very excited that we got the chance to share a little bit of history and tradition of the HoChunk people. And John Greendeer, who is a former president of HoChunk Nation, actually wrote that piece for us to just to make sure that people got the chance to learn a little bit about one of the many, many tribes in our country.
What's been the reaction from young readers?
It's funny, the thing that I hear the most about, I feel like, is that I don't like onions on my pizza. That seems to be a very controversial point in this book. I did not realize that I was setting myself up to be embroiled in an onion controversy, but I don't like onions on my pizza. So a lot of kids, the much younger kids, like to talk about that. But I think that, like, whether it's talking a lot, learning how to listen, getting the chance to make friends. These are the kinds of things that the kids that I've gotten the chance to talk to so far, you know, they'll say, "Oh, I talk a lot in school too," or you know, "I love martial arts." I had a young girl come up and she was like, "I'm doing jujitsu now." And so I think that those are really fun interactions that I'm getting to have.
Thank you, Congresswoman Charisses Davids. Well, it's Father's Day, and folks in the newsroom have a shout out to their dads. From ICT, Quindrea Yazzie has this salute. Thanks for that shout out to our fathers, Quindrea Yazi. For more news and updates, go to IndianCountryToday.com. Take time to remember those we love who aren't with us. I know I will. Remember my father and my son who've walked on. Stay safe. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.